Good morning, everyone. I'm Rob Kaiser, publisher of the Greater Wilmington Business Journal. Welcome to the Power Breakfast series. We have a great panel with us today to talk about a word that none of us even want to say right now. Before we get started, I have a few announcements. First, I'm happy to announce the Business Journal is partnering with Venture South to connect our community to the Southeast's largest angel investing network. Venture South is in 14 cities and includes more than 350 angel investors. They employ a full-time team to find deals, conduct due diligence, and track their investments. I first learned about Venture South when they expressed an interest in Quipt, which is a Wilmington-based tech company I'm involved with. Our CEO went on a roadshow to meet with Venture South angel groups in a dozen cities around the Southeast, but he never had to pitch in Wilmington. We're looking to change that by creating Venture South Wilmington to get our region plugged into this network of investors. If you're interested in learning more, we're having an information session at 10:30 this morning, right next door at the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce, with Charlie Banks, the Managing Director of Venture South. Charlie, if you could please stand to be recognized. And Charlie, if you could stay standing. Just want to make sure all the entrepreneurs in the room know he's the guy with a lot of money to invest, not me. Thanks, Charlie. Next, we have two items from our Wilma's Women to Watch Leadership Initiative. The deadline to apply or nominate someone for the 2019 Women to Watch Awards is July 1st. Go to the website that's in your program, w2waward.com, to learn more and nominate someone. Also on July 18th, Wilma's Leadership Accelerator will feature a keynote talk from Sherry Lynch from the Bob and Sherry Show, as well as a number of other leadership workshops. You can learn more and register at wilmaleadership.com. Next, I'd like to thank the sponsors who make the Power Breakfast series possible. Our presenting sponsors, who you'll hear from in a moment, are Green Resources and Pathfinder Wealth Consulting. Our corporate sponsors are AARP, Alchemy, Atlantic Bay Mortgage Group, Bank of America, Cape Fear Community College, ECS, First National Bank, ILM Airport, Megacorp Logistics, the Michelle Clark Team, New Hanover County, New Hanover Regional Medical Center, Next Home, North State Bank Mortgage, SunTrust Bank, UNCW, and Wells Fargo. Our parking sponsor is Plantation Village, and the technology sponsor is Cloudwise. Let's please have a round of applause for all of our sponsors. We'll now hear from Gary Green with Green Resources, and he'll be followed by Jason Wheeler from Pathfinder.
Good morning.
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 A certain business school studied 400 executives who had made it to the top, and compared them to 400 who fell by the wayside during their careers. The idea was to discover how those who had become successful differed from those who had not. The distinguishing quality? Perseverance. They overcame adversity and persevered. Adversity is what defines us. It makes us stronger. It's easy to have a great attitude, a strong work ethic, a positive outlook when things are going great. But how do we stand up during the tough times? We have the opportunity here this morning from a distinguished panel to talk about Wilmington's perseverance through adversity. Natalie English, President and CEO of the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce, is no stranger to adversity, successfully running over 10 bond campaigns over her chamber careers. Mayor Sappho's parents overcame adversities to immigrate to the United States from Greece. His mother did not speak a word of English when she arrived here in 1947. As Wilmington's longest-standing mayor, he has certainly helped this community through many, many adversities over the years. Michael Sprayberry cannot get enough of adversity. Whether it's serving as director, North Carolina Emergency Management, and the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, as the state's Deputy Homeland Security Advisor, or as Vice Chair of the State Emergency Response Commission, or as a member of the State Radiation Protection Commission, or previously as a U.S. Marine, or a U.S. Army National Guardsman. Commissioner Jonathan Barfield, and Chair of New Hanover Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Barfield's dad, Commissioner Joe Barfield, Sr., was the first African American elected to the position of county commissioner since post-war Reconstruction in 1898. Commissioner Barfield Jr. himself ran as only the second black county commissioner, both in his family and the county. And we have J.C. Lyle, Executive Director of Wilmington Area Rebuilding Ministry. Did you know that WARM was organized in 1966 in response to then hurricanes Bertha and Fran to help repair the damaged homes of low-income and elderly residents? Volunteers from across the region entered homes and noticed that much of the damage predated the storms. So, while responding to a natural disaster, WARM volunteers discovered a social disaster, the adversity of substandard housing. Our panelists are here to talk about the H word. I thought a lot about that, what that word might be. Healing? A process that takes time? Hands. There were thousands of individuals lending their hand to the community to help with rebuilding efforts. Heroes. All those individuals, selfless individuals, ensuring the safety and care of those around them. Humanitarians, an appropriate way to describe every citizen of the greater Wilmington region. Heartwarming. So many stories shared and experiences felt by everyone in this room and the community overall. Hope. Believing in a positive outcome, knowing that this community will persevere. I can think of another word that starts with H. Hired. At Green Resources, we help you overcome the adversities of recruiting.
Great.
Of recruiting in a tight labor market to hire great talent. Our vision is to connect people and companies in such a way so that jobs become purposeful, impactful, and long-term careers. It's more than just filling a job opening. It's about finding that one person who will make a lasting difference on your company's team and culture while feeling accomplished through their work. We would love the opportunity to help your companies persevere.
Wow. All right. Well,
Hello. I am humbled to be here this morning with all of you. Thank you very much. That was great, Gary. I'm Jason Wheeler with Pathfinder Wealth Consulting. We're a local comprehensive financial planning and an investment advisory business. We actually are in our 15th year here in Wilmington. I'm very proud to say that, and I've actually been with my business partner now for 20 years. We like to say that we've been through some of the financial storms. In fact, my career has been in two of the biggest ones. We had the tech bubble, and then we had the financial recession, the Great Recession that we just went through. Those are sort of the financial storms that are out there. And being on the coast, we always have some analogies that we use. The first is about your portfolio, and we try to tell folks that when the storm is already here is not the time to sell. So we use the analogy, if you're in Wilmington and Florence is sitting above us, or the 2 days afterwards, you don't put a for sale sign, sell it now, in front of your house. So it's the same thing with the great companies that you own. The second we think about is your financial plan, your long-term financial plan. And the analogy we use is if the lifestyle you want is on the water, there's going to be an inherent risk with a hurricane around here. And so what we always tell folks is you're going to have a really good structure. You're going to have to put insurance in place that's going to cost a little bit more. So when you think about your own financial life, the lifestyle that you want, it needs to be well funded. So you better plan ahead of time. So how do we do that? Well, we've got a great team. The team that we have here has a lot of different skill sets, a lot of different perspectives, and it really helps us collaborate to help our clients. And that's what you see up here today. I've been in Wilmington since '97, came to UNCW, but grew up in eastern North Carolina, so hurricanes were not something new. But I will tell you that now as a business owner, someone who's been involved in this community for a long time, as a parent, as a father, as a boss, all these things, I'm really proud of the way that these folks in our community really handled Hurricane Florence. And so, yeah. We have government to thank I have friends personally that work for the governments and agencies in our local area. Some of them had no power. They had no food at their house. They were at different centers trying to take care of people the entire time. And I was lucky enough to offer a shower to one of them after a few days. I think he's very appreciative of that. Our business community, a lot of you stepped up personally. But you also stepped up as a business, which is fantastic, and we were glad to see that as a community. We need that. I think nonprofits, when I think of nonprofits in town, this is in a time when nonprofits had to cancel their fundraisers, right? People were worried about their deductibles, and on top of that, you had a change in the tax code. And so, but our nonprofit community stepped up big for us as well. And then finally, I would say our neighbors. And so that's probably the biggest thing that stands out to me is how, as neighbors, we really helped each other. And these are just fantastic things. I know that we can't plan for everything. We don't try to plan for everything at Pathfinder. But I will tell you that we live by a quote. It's a famous quote. You've heard it before. Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And so after hearing about the community, about the H word, about all the things that you can do and that these folks are doing for us, think about your own financial life. If we can help you, think about your portfolio, let us know. And have a great day.
Thank you, Jason and Gary. Hurricane Florence not only left behind billions of dollars of damage, it left us with many questions about the ongoing recovery and how our region will prepare to handle the next hurricane. To discuss these issues, we have a panel representing several different viewpoints. Let's first meet our panelists, beyond Gary's great introductions. To my immediate left is Jonathan Barfield, Chairman of the New Hanover County Board of Commissioners. Next to him is Natalie English, the President and CEO of the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce. Next is J.C. Lyle, Executive Director of WARM, the Wilmington Area Rebuilding Ministry. Next is Bill Saffo, Mayor of the City of Wilmington. And on the end is Mike Sprayberry, North Carolina's Director of Emergency Management. Let's please have a round of applause for our panel. If you have a question for the panel today, please text it in to the number that's in your program. It's 910-264-8955. Make sure you include your name and table number with the text. We'll get a microphone to as many people as possible so you can ask your question directly to the panelists. So let's kick it off with an easy question for Director Sprayberry, and then we'll get some local reaction. So how do we not become an island again? And if we do become an island, how do we get supplies in?
Rob, that's a great question. And so I will tell you that currently North Carolina Department of Transportation, they have a hydraulics unit within DOT, and they have just completed a study of I-95 and I-40 and 421 to look at the spots where we had flooding during Florence and I think also Matthew, to determine what kind of projects that they could integrate into ongoing projects as well as projects that they could receive in the future for future funding. So that's good news to know that DOT, and I know Secretary Trogdon, a lot of you probably do, but he's very aggressive, former two-star general. He's out there. They're trying to come up with a good plan to make sure that drainage on either sides of our mobility corridors is a lot better. And so they're working on that. I can tell you that during Florence, I was sitting in the state EOC and we were looking at a way to try to get in supplies into Wilmington. And one of the things that we did is we coordinated with the Department of Defense and the U.S. Department of Transportation, and we basically got a ship. And I think it was called the SS Ray. And we got it. It was on the way from Florida, and it was going to come into the port of Morehead City, where it's going to be restocked and refurbished and then turned back south to Wilmington, but then the roads came open again. And I say that just to say this, I mean, we're up at the EOC working for, and it was a big ship, I'm not just talking about a small one, it was a big one. And so We have the capacity and the capability to reach out to any number of different partners. Yesterday, I was with Department of Defense officials. We have a yearly meeting to where we talk about how we can gather up anything that they have. During Hurricane Irma, an aircraft carrier was used in Florida, so we can reach out and get those types of resources. If we determine that's what we need, we can certainly use it. And I will tell you this too, leadership of this state, when it comes to spending money on a disaster, there's no party involved. Everybody believes, let's full speed ahead, let's take care of it.
Mm-hmm. So can we get a local perspective from either Chairman Barfield or Mayor Saffo?
You know, Rob, I think planning ahead is truly important. Looking back on the many storms that have come to our community, I think moving forward we'll definitely pre-stage food, water, work with our airport to make sure that there are adequate fuel farms to fuel the jets to come into our airport, making sure that if that doesn't happen, that we can still land helicopters there to get supplies back and forth, but making sure that those supplies are in place. You know, working with our other partners like Cape Public Utility Authority to make sure that they have a fuel farm as well so that we don't lose power, that we don't lose water. Recognizing that some areas in our community will lose power for 1 or 2 days, some may be 2 or 3 weeks. And planning for that, I think, is so important. Several years ago when Hurricane Bertha or Fran came to our community, I was on Cape Fear Utilities water, the old Dobo water. And in my neighborhood, we got power back, but they had lost their power at their pumping station. So although I had electricity, we had no water coming to our home, which created a challenge for many. Fortunately, I had a well and a pump in my yard, so I was able to get some cold, rusty water coming in, which gave me a cold bath, but I had water. But that's not the case for many folks in our community. So I think, again, pre-planning and knowing that a storm is indeed coming. And with most hurricanes, you know at least a week in advance what's going to happen. I found myself at Go Gas trying to get gas for a generator at the 11th hour, and gas was running out. That's the wrong time to go and prepare. A week and a half or 2 weeks ahead of time is the time that we'll be preparing.
I would just say that the big issue post-storm is making certain that we're not an island again. I think that we're all coalesced around this one specific idea that 40 and 95 have got to be raised so we can get people in here and get the supplies in here in the aftermath of a hurricane. But even more than that, we've had now 2 significant storms, Matthew and Florence, within 24 months that have really raised havoc in this entire community and this area in southeastern North Carolina. And so we're dealing with folks that are in Pender County, in Brunswick County, in Bladen County, in Columbus County, that are also deeply affected by this. And how we engage with those communities and work with them to help them also, because what you see, especially in some parts of Pender County, where I believe there was about 6,000 people displaced, a lot of those folks came into the city of Wilmington County of New Hanover because there was shelter here, in addition to the amount of people that we had displaced here that we were dealing with. So that particular part of it is very important to us. And this could take 5, maybe even 7 years before these roads are even raised. So there's a process that we have to go through. And then we also have to work with those communities, those counties, with those legislators that have concerns of their own in those parts of this area. So we have to work together. It's a must. If we just do it, say all we care about is 4095 and not the other areas that have been affected by this, that have really been devastated, we're getting nowhere.
Mm-hmm. So what is the cost going to be to raise 40 and 95?
I believe on 40, what the general had shared with us at the chamber was about $156 million, and the 95 piece, which was a very significant piece, could be up to over $300 million. So that one, we might have to go around and improve the secondary roads instead of raising the entire structure there because of the cost. Maybe just prohibitive.
Mm-hmm. So maybe Natalie and JC, can you talk a little bit about what, for the business community, for housing interests and for repairs and rebuilding to get started, what that means when we're shut off like this?
Sure. From an economic development perspective, it's a bad image, right? Our economic developers in this region, when they are working with potential relocations, the first questions are, how are your schools what if we get cut off again? Because as many of our businesses faced closures because of power outages, they also faced closures because their employees couldn't get back in. And so I just heard about one yesterday that's a critical contractor for DOT. So for DOT to respond to washed out roads and railroads, they couldn't get the product that they needed from a business in our community. And so we have to address that. And it's the mayor's point about it being a regional answer is so on the money, because it's not just elevating highways. If we did that, we're saying to every community between here and Raleigh, we don't care about you because it will increase their flood issues if all we do is elevate highways. So we have to look at what are we doing about the flow of water from other parts of the state down east, because it's impacted every step of the way if we're not dredging streams and rivers appropriately, if we're not investing as a state, as local communities, in things like stormwater management. Most of us probably didn't have to deal with flooding because we have a city and a county that are investing in infrastructure in our community to protect us from that, and they will continue to do that. Other communities are not so fortunate. So we need to be helping them find the resources to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I would warn against the sensationalism of, oh, how are we going to become an island again? People live on islands all the time. They're prepared for it. They know it's coming. They're prepared for it. So I would just underscore the efforts of the county and the city to become more prepared. All three counties that WARM serves anyway, New Hanover, Pender, and Brunswick, are forming long-term recovery groups to work with the local governments and put together plans for preparedness, making sure we know where the stations are going to be set up to help give supplies, maybe not in the larger stations, but break them up into smaller places so folks who don't have transportation can get to them. Pre-stage, our linemen, like Duke Energy has done, pre-stage food and volunteers that can go in and do some mucking and gutting immediately, do emergency repairs, tarping in case we have another storm on the way 3 weeks later like we did this time. So I would just underscore the focus on the preparedness until we can get the infrastructure improved on a larger scale.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the recovery funds. What has come in already, and what should we expect going forward, and how that process will work?
So I see you looking at me, Rob.
I heard you've been talking about this a little bit recently.
We're all looking at you, Mike.
Yes, and so, it's interesting. During Matthew, there's almost $100 million that got put out for individual assistance, which goes to homeowners to help repair their homes and to replace goods inside their homes. We are going to be spending close to a $500 million on public assistance, which goes to roads, debris removal, water, wastewater plants, things like that. Hazard mitigation is about $114 million. So a lot of stuff like that. Florence, you're looking at over $1 billion. That's just for public assistance. For individual assistance is going to be, it's completed now, but that was about $130 million. And then for hazard mitigations, buyouts, and that kind of thing, that's going to be about $165 million. And so there were $600 million paid out in the National Flood Insurance Program, and here's my plug. Flood insurance, you need to have it. People that had it are back in a better place so quick. So there's already been $1.5 billion that's been basically put out on the streets from Hurricane Florence. And that's not, we're talking also, there's about, between Matthew and Florence, we had about $350-60 million from state funds. Then we have Community Development Block Grants for Disaster Recovery, CDBGDR. Took me a long time to have it roll off my tongue like that. And that comes from HUD. And it doesn't make sense to me as an emergency management to think speed to the need. You get awarded this funding, and then up to like a year to 18 months later, then the funding becomes available. Doesn't make sense to me as a recovery guy. But right now, as you probably know, we've taken a lot of flack on what we called a slow spender, and because we were given the duty to create a shop for spending this funding. And so I liken it, the analogy is if you have a new startup business and you haven't planned on it to start it up, you don't have a place to work to start it up, you have no trained people to start it up, but then you're given the mission of starting to spend $236 million that has, I think, maybe 80 rules and regulations that govern it. It's pretty difficult. I don't want to whine to you, but we're now in a place with our new Office of Recovery and Resiliency where we're starting to award funds, about $11-12 million, but if you'll go to the General Assembly, they'll gladly tell you that they're not happy with that. We anticipate getting $168 million more dollars that's solely going to be for mitigation. It was announced, that should be coming in any time now. It was announced that the state was going to get another $336 million for Florence, but that hasn't hit yet. What they do to make it so that we have a hard time managing expectations is they'll do a press release saying you're getting ready to get $336 million and then silence. We can't do anything until there's a federal register. And then the federal register gives us the guidelines to do a state action plan. And then we have to submit a state action plan, and then HUD has to basically approve it. So you see the timeline starts to expand. So in the end, we anticipate getting over $1 billion in HUD funding. And a lot of it will go in counties just like New Hanover, Pender, Brunswick, on all the rest around here. And I've probably spoken much too much, Rob. But it's a lot of money to be managed.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big questions in our community now. Maybe our local officials can talk, well, what does this look like on the other end?
There's always a level of frustration in the aftermath of a storm getting that money back out on the street, as Mike indicated. And there is a process. And then having to go to Washington and talking to those folks up there, it's, you're going to the Department of Commerce, you're going to the Department of Transportation, you're going to HUD, you're going to the White House, you're going to different organizations that you're talking to. And you're saying to yourself, why don't you just put it under one umbrella so we can talk to one group of people about this? So you're going from department to department to department, and everybody's got their own separate rules. And if you don't cross the T's and dot the I's, you're not going to get the reimbursement, or they'll penalize you for it. So the other part of this is the process of getting the reimbursement back, which takes a considerable amount of time and a lot of effort. And the city and the county have got to also spend money to make sure that we're doing everything properly so we can get the reimbursement from FEMA and from the state. So there's a whole process in there. So there's a lot of bureaucracy that we're having to work through to get that. And then at the same time, you're dealing with the populace that is also wants to get back into their homes, get their places fixed, get their roads done. And so there's a level of frustration that perks up there.
And like the boss is saying here, cash flow can become a very big issue very quickly, even for big communities, because you have some really big projects that you're working on that cost a lot of money. So you're wanting to be reimbursed very quickly.
Rob, I can't thank our county team enough, led by our manager, Chris Goudray, and his team, and also the Board of Commissioners, who a couple of years ago put together not only a debt policy, but also a fund balance policy. And our fund balance is basically our savings account, and as we collect resources coming in, want to make sure that we have money aside, so if a storm comes into our community, we have the resources to take care of our citizens here. Unlike some other counties that may not have had as big of a fund balance, we were pretty well prepared financially for this storm when it came here. We expended in excess of $27 million out of our fund balance to help with this storm, right down the storm that we pick up, running shelters in our community. And I can't thank our county employees enough as well. Every county employee that works for another county, when you sign on, you're agreeing when a storm comes into our community to work a shift, a 12-hour shift, no matter where that is. Some folks came in on that Tuesday and didn't get home until that Friday. And they were at a shelter somewhere working, or working in our EOC all that time, making sure that our citizens here were covered, protected, and that were prepared for the storm that was coming as well as the storm that was here. And partnering with people like the Red Cross coming in to help man the shelters once our team left 2 weeks later. We never thought that we'd have a shelter up and running for in excess of 2 to 3 weeks. And it's amazing the resiliency of the folks that were staying in those shelters. I talked to one lady, and she said, Commissioner Barfield, I've been here for a week now, and I've not had a bath other than a bird bath at the sink. Those kind of stories really touch you. You recognize that folks that were there really need to be in those shelters, and making sure that resources are in place to cover the cost of those things is so important. I'm wearing my Hurricane Florence pin. Our county manager, of his own accord, gave this pin to every county employee, 1,500 plus, that worked during that storm, just to say thank you for your effort in protecting the citizens in our community. Thank you for going above and beyond the call of duty to make sure that our shelters were manned, that when we had the points of distribution to give out tarps and MREs and water, that you were there to serve the citizens in our community. And I think that bodes well for Nutter County with the system that we have in place. So of the 27 plus million that we've expended, we've received about $9.5 million from FEMA, and we're hoping to get those other dollars reimbursed as well, as our fund balance has definitely taken a pretty strong hit. We also set up this disaster recovery center, and I want to thank Beth Schrader for her brilliant mind in coming up with this great idea to rent the Sears building and have a one-stop shop for every resident in our community to go to get resources. So you had every insurance company with their trailers out there in Searstown to service the people from our region, not just our community, but from our region. Folks came there from different counties as well to receive support. We also had the DSNAP set up there, Disaster Supplemental Nutrition Program, there with our DSS office. And we served in excess of 20,000 residents from this region that came through there to get assistance. So a lot of money has gone out from this community based on money coming in, but we had a plan in place prior to that to make sure that you all were covered and served well.
Our story, our hurricane recovery funding story is a lot brighter. And if you're in this room, I bet most of you in this room donated to your favorite nonprofit right after the hurricane. Aren't you glad now, knowing the bureaucracy around some of the state and federal funds, that the private sector really came through? And that is what I've seen since the storm came through, that it's on everybody's heart and mind, and that translates into their checkbooks to donate to the folks that are on the ground doing the work. The Governor's Fund was administered through Golden Leaf Foundation, and Foundation for the Carolinas. A lot of the private foundations really stepped up to the plate. WARM had to hire a couple more construction people to spend the money in the time frame we were asked to spend it. So we had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in 6 months, and we said, all right, we know our community needs us. We have a lot of local support, including volunteers, donors, roofers, and we got our marching orders and we went out and did it, and the funding is still flowing, and we're happy to see that. We have a lot of volunteers that are coming in from out of state, from out of the area even, to help our recovery efforts. So we couldn't even invite them here if it weren't for y'all stepping up to the plate and donating and making it happen. So thank you.
And Rob, I think it's important to point out to this crowd that the money that you're talking about is individual assistance. So there is no grant program for business. There are opportunities for loans. So I'd encourage you as a business owner, as you are planning for the future, to reach out to your partners, to your financial planners, to your insurance company, to your banker, to the SBTDC, the SBC. Those are resources that can help you figure out what do you need to do to make sure you have the things in place to help you recover more quickly. It's a sad thing that we don't think about investing in the recovery of businesses. The national recovery rate for small business following a disaster is less than 50%. Think of all the jobs that represents. We cannot lose almost 50% of the jobs in this community. And so, in addition to all that pre-planning you need to do to make sure you recover as a business owner, you also need to think about how you can help other businesses. So when we got back from the storm and my entire team got back at the chamber, at least 3 days a week I was having somebody go to one of the restaurants in town that were open to buy lunch for the team, just to play our part. And so I recommend that you think about the ways you can help other businesses recover as well.
Let's talk a little bit about affordable housing, which was an issue before the storm and a greater issue after the storm, with a lot of houses that couldn't be occupied, a lot of apartment communities that had to close down. So I start off with JC, if you could kind of paint the picture for us of what the affordable housing issue looked like before the storm and what it looks like now.
Sure. Well, before the storm, it was already difficult for people to afford a decent place to live. And when we say affordable housing, again, it's not a scary term. It's a blanket term for affordable. Just means you can pay for your housing and your utilities with 30% of your income. So everybody in here needs some kind of affordable housing. The market usually provides affordable housing for most of us. For the folks who make lower incomes, the market doesn't really provide that. You have to make about $40,000 a year to afford a two-bedroom apartment at about $1,000 a month around in this area. People on minimum wage are making $15,000 a year. So the market just isn't providing the housing that's needed for a lot of the firefighters and teachers, childcare workers, servers, administrative assistants. And part of the economic development issue that it's harder to find. We're competing for this talent now. We want them to move here. We want them to have a great place to live. It affects traffic. We have 40,000 or more cars coming into New Hanover County every day. So what if they could, how many of them would not be commuting 40 minutes if they could afford to live here and help with the traffic problem a little bit? So it has always been an issue that we've collectively needed to work on and been making some progress toward putting a housing trust fund together and some other plans at our task force that the county and city put together a few years ago. I've been working on.
So what are other, how are these issues being addressed? How big is the problem now, especially with, I guess, particularly the apartment communities that may not even be rebuilt or will take a long time to be rebuilt? How does it look from the county-city perspective?
Well, it was a problem before the storm. I think the governor even alluded to it. It's now a much bigger problem after the storm because of the amount of folks that have been displaced in the aftermath of the storm. The good news is that the city and county have had a joint task force or a group that have looked at this issue, and the only way you describe it is, they're saying that we're 10,000 homes short in regards to the affordable home market. I've said it over and over again. I believe that government at some level is going to have to subsidize some of this if it's going to happen. But let's not forget that most housing is subsidized through FHA, VA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. It's all subsidized housing. You have a certain amount of your down payment is subsidized by the federal government. So this is just another tool or another lever that we're going to have to look at to determine how much more housing we can get in place. I don't see 10,000 homes I just don't see that we can be able to put 10,000 homes on the marketplace, but I do believe that we can definitely pick up a certain amount from the developments that are out there by working with developers, by partnering with folks to make this happen. It's a very tough problem because we have more demand than we have supply. Geographically, we're a very small area. And as the area continues to grow and the population continues to grow, and I think the projections for this area are pretty significant for the next 20 years, that population of affordable homes is going to go further and further out, which then creates another issue for us, which is traffic. Because as people go further and further out to find affordable homes to be able to live in, they usually come back into the job market, which is primarily in New Hanover County and the city of Wilmington. And so that creates another issue for us. So the more affordable homes that we can put on the market, the better off we are. And the good news is that we have hired, or we're going to be hiring, an affordable housing specialist between the city and the county, and putting a working group together that will give us recommendations and options that we can work on as policymakers and hopefully bring more affordable units on the market. But it is going to take some time, and some of these units that we lost in the aftermath of the storm are not going to come back, or they're going to come back in a different form. I truly believe that because they're privately sector owned, so they make those decisions.
The county, we've been behind the 8 ball for quite a while. I think we took a trip with the chamber 3 or 4 years ago to Charleston, South Carolina, and we met with their economic development professionals and looking at what they're doing to increase job capacity there as the Boeing facility was built there with 8,500 jobs. And what they noted is that with all the folks that are working at that facility, people are driving 30, 40, 50 miles away from Charleston to go to work there because they can't afford to live in Charleston proper. And we're seeing the same situation here in the other county now. When you say the word affordable housing, that word means different things to different people. But as JC just said, your goal is to make sure that you're housing costs do not exceed 30% of your income coming into your home. And if it's more than that, then your housing burden, your cost burden. And there's so many folks in our community that are facing that challenge. When it comes to some of the public housing in our community or more affordable housing, I reached out to the Telesis group that runs the Gervais community to figure out what's going on and why haven't I seen much progress there, as many folks, I think over 220 some individuals were displaced from those units alone. And I finally got a report back showing how many units were vacant, how many units they were working on, and they've really made no progress there. Then you hear about Market North, which is in the same particular predicament. And most of those communities are privately owned by individuals, and they're trying to figure out now in the aftermath of the storm, how do we maximize our profit? How do we make the most amount of money on this particular project? When you look at the Glen, which may become student housing for UNCW, I've got a young daughter that's at UNC Charlotte, and she's in a 4-bedroom apartment with 3 other girls right on outside of campus. And each one of those kids are paying $630 a month for their apartment, times 4 in that one unit. So there's tremendous money to be made by housing students in a college community, and I think some folks are figuring that out as well. So as a realtor, I'm working with clients now. One lady's been pre-approved for $175. We can't find a home in our county for her for $175. We've been going over to Brunswick County and looking, and everything that we look at, as soon as you go to write an offer on it, there are two or 3 or 4 offers already on that particular property, as the stock is just not there. I mentioned before that our county raised our minimum wage for county employees last year to $15 an hour, just over $31,000 a year. And while that's good, if you're a single individual, county employee, teacher, sheriff's deputy, there's not a house that you could really afford to buy in New Hanover County that fits that salary. We have a problem here in New Hanover County. And in my opinion, we need to partner with our developers and provide the right incentives, whether it's reducing some of our fees from the county standpoint, looking at K-Free Public Utility Authority, reducing some of their impact fees as well to make these projects more affordable. The county has 15 acres of land out in Wrightsboro that was deemed for a park a while ago that will not be used for a park. And so we're looking at how can we utilize that land to partner with a developer to develop affordable housing. In crunching the land down and looking at the wetlands and on the property, we have roughly 8 acres of land we can use. So now how can we provide an affordable option for our community here as well? But that's a conversation that we need to have. We do have this joint person coming on with the city and the county. We're about to appoint members of that committee. But again, we should have done this 10 years ago, looking at where we are right now. As we're slated to get another 40 or 50,000 people here in the next 15 to 20 years. And we see apartments coming up all the time. We have a rezoning request coming up at our July meeting, and folks in our community are up in arms about the number of apartments that are coming here. But folks have to have somewhere that they can afford to live, and that's just the challenge that we face here in our community.
Let's take our first audience question from Audrey at table 18.
Hi. So I hear completely that Market North and the Glen are private entities, but how is it determined when it is price gouging and when it is their decision to make to increase? And then also, how can the community kind of rally behind these communities to make sure that they do remain affordable? Is there anything that we as a community and a community member can do to really encourage them to stay as affordable housing?
So I'm going to give you a little bit, Audrey, of a flippant response, and mean no offense by it, but if you have an extra bedroom in your house, should you have to offer that in a time of disaster to someone? It's kind of the same thing if you tell a landowner, a developer, that they have to keep prices at a certain level, that they have to house people in affordable housing. And that's why you've heard both the mayor and the chairman talk about partnerships. There are some creative examples all over the country of communities that are raising significant amounts of dollars to offer a partnership to a property owner. So just think about it. You own property, you don't want government telling you what you can and can't do with it, but for safety, right? So we can't expect that our property owners in this community should not be able to make the money. I mean, that's the American way, right? And we have to take care of people. So your help in correcting a perception that bad people won't build affordable housing, that's not fair. The market is demanding a price in this community that's great, right? Because our people, we can make money, and we can partner with government to make sure that we're providing affordable housing.
So I've got a question related to this, where many communities are requiring housing developments to include a set percentage of units that are affordable. Is that something that's in place or being looked at?
I'll pick up that one for a minute. As
Do you feel strongly about this,
I
Jason?
might be a little defensive being on the Planning Commission, but the state of North Carolina does not empower localities to force that on developers. That's not legal for planning commissions or governments at any level in our state to require that for rezoning requests or building permits or anything. So, and honestly, neither should they. It's not a developer problem, it's a society problem. So we need to work together to find solutions, not try to hang it on somebody else and say it's somebody else's responsibility to handle this problem. It's all of our problems, because it affects everybody, every company, every daycare, every school. When teachers and childcare workers are stressed out on their way to work, I don't know if anybody loves driving through traffic to get to work. It affects us on all levels, and we can't find the talent we need to fill the jobs. And so we all need to be part of the solution, not just force developers to build it. And one thing you can take away from today that every person in here can do to help the affordable housing crisis, notice that there's a formula. There's income and affordability. The cost of their housing is part of the formula, but also is their income. You can overtip and increase incomes. You can overtip. Every person in here can help part of that problem by increasing wages. I mean, just a minute bit. But if we all did stuff like that, we could really make a dent in our problem.
And Rob, we can definitely incentivize builders to build more affordable products in our community. And again, various ways to do that, whether it's the fees that local governments charge, finding ways to partner with them in those regards. I'm sure you all have heard of Project Grace. We're looking at possibly developing or redeveloping this block that the county owns downtown where the current library is. And part of the negotiation with Zimmer Development would be to have a certain number, I think 10% of the apartments within that development deemed as affordable units based on HUD guidelines, I believe. And 10% out of 220-something units is 22 units that would be affordable. And no one in that building would know who's paying this rent versus that rent. And I think those are ways that we can definitely help as well as we go down that road of Project Grace. And hopefully you all are in support of that or have heard of it at least.
Let's take the next question from Brandon, table 31.
All right. Hello. Thank you. Should we be going through full-scale hurricane drills that involve several agencies coinciding with one another, like once or twice a year? Do you think maybe that would also be helpful, full-scale drills?
We do that. I don't know if anybody's aware of this, but our Emergency Operations Center, working with the county and working with the city, practice these things a lot. And I'm just going to go share something with my Deputy City Manager, Tony Caller, told me. We were prepared for this storm. We were prepared. This community was prepared. This region was prepared. But every hurricane, it's got its own DNA. And no one thought in the wildest dreams that a hurricane would stay on top of us for literally 48 hours and drop the amount of water that it did. And really, it was literally walking at 3 miles an hour, which created another type of scenario for all of us that we weren't, some of the things we anticipated, some things we were not anticipated on. So we were prepared for this storm. And these folks that are in emergency operations, our police departments, our fire departments, all the folks that are sitting there know what they're doing, and they're professionals. And they work with Mike and his team at the state. We're working with the federal folks. I mean, heck, for the love of God, we even had the President of the United States calling down here saying, what do you folks need? So we were prepared. But every one of these storms are different. And I feel that as these storms get up into the northern latitudes, they tend to be bigger, wetter, and slower. What you see down in the Gulf and down in Florida, they're faster. And the velocity of the speeds of the winds, obviously with what we saw down there this last year.
Michael, they just pop up.
It can get up to Category 5. I mean, so I believe we're going to be dealing with wetter storms, larger storms, slower storms. And we've seen that in the last several years.
I think it's key to remember that Florence dumped between 8 and 10 trillion gallons of water on us. That's a lot of water. I mean, there's no way that we could take that. And so, like the mayor says, this is our new storm of record. Before that, Matthew was our storm of record. It overtook Floyd. The damages caused by Florence for this state are greater than the damages caused by both Matthew and Floyd combined. People tend to forget that. You know, they say, well, you guys aren't recovering very quickly, and we saved as a team well over 5,000 people. I went to Indiana last weekend to receive an award for all the great work that all of our local swiftwater rescue teams and the state swiftwater rescue teams working together did. I mean, it was great. I mean, to get that recognition. But the mayor's right. We just had my team, we had a statewide hurricane exercise this past May, and they're saying, really, boss? Again, an exercise? We've just been through these the real deal. We know what we're doing, but we got to keep that drill going because faces change, new people. Plus, we want to take lessons learned, integrate that into our battle drill, and make sure we're building more capacity, building more capability. Because as y'all can see, a lot of smart people here. Severe weather. Right now, there's people in a shelter in Charlotte from the heavy, severe rains that we had over the last few days in shelters in Charlotte. I mean, really, right? And so it's severe weather. It's more frequent. So we have to be more prepared for it. And it's also not just a responsibility of government. It's a personal responsibility. And so used to, I would say, okay, be ready for 3 days. I say be ready 5, 7 days, and be ready to check on your neighbors too.
Absolutely.
You know, Rob, the phrase practice makes perfect. Really appreciate Stephen Steele, our emergency management director, and his team for putting on drills periodically for our community. But he brings in all the team players, whether it's the United Way, the Red Cross, the hospital, the different EMT organizations in our community, and all the partners that would be a part of our EOC. They are there for this drill, so they know exactly what their job is, whether it's logistics, whether it's setting up the shelters in our community. And these things happen on a regular basis to make sure that if a storm comes here, and at any given point in time, we're prepared. I love talking about this movie Volcano. If you've ever seen the movie Volcano, you'll see their EOC there. That's just what it's like at the Government Center. If anyone's never been there, I would love to give you a tour. To me, it's a fascinating environment to go into when you actually see it fully operational with all different types of people coming in together, manning the phones to make sure that they can protect our citizens in our community. What we've done since this last hurricane, our county management team did an after-action assessment plan and really brought in over 120 some individuals, county employees, outside groups as well, to really tear apart the lessons that we learned from Hurricane Florence, the things that we did well, and the things that we didn't do well. How can we improve? I think any smart organization will look at your strengths and your weaknesses and not rest on your laurels, but also try to improve from step to step to step, and really listen to the boots on the ground, so to speak. Your employees that are actually doing the work give you the best intel. So we had those folks at the table giving us intel in terms of what they saw out in the field, whether it's at the shelters, whether at the EOC, whether it's on the street with our firefighters and our sheriff's deputies and police officers, to fully understand how we can be better prepared when the next storm comes as well.
You got that right. And I just wanted to say, our first responders are great, and they do such a fantastic job, and our greatest partners are those at the local level. But I think what reinforced for us during Florence was the importance of our healthcare coalitions and the need for them, so shout out to y'all. I'm telling you, the importance of having hospitals still running.
Absolutely.
And that is just huge. And then we were able to also utilize our healthcare coalitions from other places in the state to set up medical shelters. And then that leads me to talk about sheltering. We learned a lot about sheltering. I mean, we've sheltered more with this disaster than we ever have, and it's very difficult to staff them and to find a place that can take them all. So we did what he was saying. We did a comprehensive hot wash too, and I will tell you that we have more than 120 items for improvement. But you want to pick yourself apart, because those friction points, that helps you become a better organization and better prepared next time.
And the private sector also does drills. If you think about, Mike mentioned the hospital, Duke Energy. Those companies that are directly involved in immediate response and recovery, they do their drills. And so, Brandon, the answer is do your drill. Not just a business drill to make sure that you are prepared, but do your home drill. And when you see on the news media in the month of May, start getting prepared, pay attention to it. Don't just go, another list. It is a list. It's an important list. And if we are all prepared, that's our drill, Brandon, for the whole community.
So let's talk about shelters for a minute. Locally, what worked, what didn't work, what's the plan for the future of shelters here?
Locally, we utilize our schools for shelters, and I know Trask Middle School, Noble Middle School received and had some problems going forward. There was some water intrusion at Trask and water intrusion at Noble as well. We eventually relocated everyone over to Hoggard High School, to the new gym that was built there, and that seemed to work well. There's also a challenge in feeding that number of people. Thankfully, the World Kitchen came to our community and provided food for several days, along with our county team, making sure that the right resources were in place. We're now looking at future shelters for this upcoming season, as we are right now in hurricane season, and trying to identify schools that would not be in a flood area, number one, great populations of people, number two, and also taking into account some of the new schools that we're building to make sure we're putting people in the right places. And we're trying to make sure that we're in every quadrant of our county as well. This past storm, we opened up 5 shelters. I've been on the board for 11 years. We've never opened up 5 shelters before. And we had all 5 shelters pretty much at maximum capacity when Hurricane Florence came here. And it was really great that we built Hoggard High School's new gym to be able to have that type of capacity, to have people in both of those gyms in the end as we combine folks, as some shelters were failing. Now the goal is to make sure that our generators are up and running in our schools now, so we don't lose power. There's adequate fuel for those as well. Make sure that our roofs are secured and as strong as possible, so that we won't have water intrusion problems in the future, and also making sure that there's adequate food, for folks as well. I wish we had bathroom facilities. I know that there's some agencies in our community that provide mobile showers. I think that would be something great for us to provide for folks. As you've been somewhere for 4, 5, or 6 days and not having adequate chance to bathe, it can be challenging for some individuals. And then the medical piece. We had some folks that needed medical attention, and we partnered with the hospital in a very great way, and the NHRMC does a phenomenal job for our community in providing health care resources for the citizens here. But there are some folks that needed medical attention. We were able to transport those folks to the hospital, and in some cases we had hospital individuals right there at the shelters as well to make sure that those folks had what they need.
If you knew we were facing a similar storm this year, what would you recommend or do in terms of evacuation orders?
Run!
I do think the community sometimes, there's a message, is it mandatory, is it voluntary? If you hear the word voluntary from us, that means if you can get out, get out. Mandatory, and I think they can do this in the state of South Carolina. I don't believe we can do it here in North Carolina that way, except for the beaches. But mandatory for us, at least from our perspective, from the city's perspective, is you got a percentage of the population that do not have cars, that do not have the resources to stay away for 10, 15 days if need be. We've got to be able to make certain that those folks and those citizens are protected. And so we're also evaluating the facilities in the city. We're building 2 new gyms, possibly seeing about reinforcing those to category 4 and 5 if need be. Plus the fact is that we had a lot of our city employees that had to evacuate with their families. Trying to get them back in here to help us was also a challenge. So if we're going to ask somebody to embed with us and stay with us during a hurricane, we also want to make sure that we're protecting them. So we have to make sure that the facilities that we are building are strong enough to be able to house the city employees that will stay with us in the aftermath of the storm, because these people were at the helm for 12 straight days, 24 hours a day. And that was phenomenal to see them work the way they did in the conditions that they were working in. So we want to make sure that we have those in place for our next event.
So the mayor nailed it. If you order a mandatory evacuation, That means that you have to ensure, you being government, have to ensure that if there are people that have no way to evacuate, you have to give them a way. And typically in North Carolina, we have left evacuation orders up to local jurisdiction. It's a county responsibility is the way we look at it. But I will tell you, for the first time in history, last year, the governor decided to order a mandatory evacuation of the barrier islands. And, but I will tell you, just as you might expect, not everybody left. And just as you might expect, there were a lot of people that were hollering for help after the storm passed. And just as you might expect, we did provide that help, because we're not gonna turn our back on anybody. But I want to also tell you that right now we have a Know Your Zone initiative that's underway, where we are working with all the counties so that they can select a well-defined evacuation zone, and so that can be socialized with your visitors, with your residents. And it's unbelievable, but we're the last state, really, of all the hurricane states to have these type of well-defined zones. We're not defining the zones for you. You get to select the zones that you want to have, but we're going to use our funding to help you socialize that. It'll be up on a website too, and it's not in effect this year, but we intend to roll it out next year. We want to sort of gradually move into it, but we're very excited about the initiative. It's called Know Your Zone.
You know, when you say the word evacuation, there are many folks that looked at the county and some were critical that we didn't issue a mandatory evacuation for the entire community. But that word really has impacts on different organizations, positive and negative. And so our goal right now is looking at our county and looking at areas that may have flooded before and maybe having a mandatory evacuation for those areas, but not others. So think about the hospital. If we issued a mandatory evacuation for our entire county, what does a hospital do to get all the patients that are in the hospital out of there? The folks that are on oxygen, the folks that are in the ER, the folks that are in the ICU units, how do they evacuate those individuals, and where do they take them once they evacuate them? Every nursing home in our community would also face the same challenge. Then our sheriff in our jail. We've got over 400 and almost 500 individuals that are inmates in our local jail. We would have to evacuate all those individuals and find some place to take them as well. So when you say the word evacuation and mandatory, it has many different implications. And I find that UNCW, our hospital, General Electric, and other entities in our community have their own evacuation plans. And as we were talking with the governor during Hurricane Florence, we were encouraging him not to issue a mandatory evacuation for the entire county. Let the officials that run the county, who best know what's happening here, make that call. And in the end, he acquiesced to us, and we made the call to not issue a mandatory evacuation. But in the future, again, looking at different zones in our community, as you're saying, know your zones, and making sure that folks that are in areas that may be prone to flooding will indeed get out of there, but folks that may not be, shelter in place, so to speak.
Next question's Jonathan, table 18.
Thank you. If and when another hurricane comes, is the city allowed to use available office and retail spaces, just like the Sears plan that you all had, as official outpost for residents to pick up emergency supplies? The thinking is that not everybody can get to downtown, so can we go to where the people are at in a larger area?
I'll pick up on that first. Yeah. The county actually leased the Sears space, and fortunately we had a space that was empty and vacant and available, but we put a contract in place through Best Rader's team to actually lease that space. But I think that she was thinking about that well before, and I'm glad that we did, and it provided places for the other first responders that came to our community down the road to also assist our community as well as having space for FEMA when they came to our community as well. But it definitely is the dollar cost with that.
And the New Hanover County Disaster Recovery Coalition is working closely with the county and the city to identify those outpost opportunities. So yes, absolutely, and thankfully we learned from our experience to do that.
And just one step further, I will also applaud the faith-based community, the churches, because there were places around the county that where the churches had brought in a lot of these groups that were coming in there to help us, Samaritan's Purse and Barbecue. Which one was the one from Slidell, Louisiana?
Mission Murphy? No, that's.
Well, the Cajun Navy was here. We had Barbecue One, and just different organizations that just came pouring in here in the aftermath of the storm. And a lot of these ended up in church facilities, and where churches took them, and then we used the churches to distribute a lot of the resources that we had coming in through the church organizations and churches in the community, which did a phenomenal job.
Next question, table 39, Samira.
Hi. One of the questions I had pertained to affordable housing and what we talked about, that, putting restrictions on developers is often, not feasible. I represent one of the larger developers in the state of Florida who specializes in affordable and transitional housing, as well as increasingly nationally. They're interested in bringing over 100 to 300 units to our county here. Now, one of the reasons that they are so successful, in addition to partnering with mental health transitional services, because there's a lot that goes into affordable housing, right? It's not just the units, is that wherever they set up nationally, they're able to take advantage of the tax credits. When I spoke with North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, of course, we do offer those same tax credits here, but understandably, the cycle had already run, and these tax credits typically, they can run up to 9%. So knowing that at last count, we had approximately $90 million in unallocated funds designated for hurricane recovery, my question is, would it be possible to allocate some of those funds in a matched basis to the, for example, 9% under the terms and conditions that those programs enforce, thus opening the playing field to developers who specialize in affordable housing, enabling them to come here and potentially take care of this issue so that we don't have to discuss pushing additional pressure on perhaps others that are, this is not what they do. Thanks.
I think that it's a good question, but based on how that money is divvied up, there's significant restrictions on that money, how it's dispersed, and that would take some legislative action for that to happen.
Yeah, right, and so I'm going to tell you something, and it'll probably won't be a big shocker to you, but I'm not the greatest expert on financing affordable housing. And so I'm a big proponent of affordable housing, and in fact, increasing the portfolio of affordable housing for North Carolina is the #1 priority for my agency. And you say, but you're the emergency management guy. I had somewhat of an epiphany after Matthew when I keep seeing people get flooded out that are folks that are basically living in they're living in affordable housing, substandard housing really, and they live in the floodplain. And so I feel like it's my responsibility to find a place for those people to move to, get out of the floodplain. That lessens my responsibility to respond to them, and it gives them a better life, and it makes for a better state and nation. I know it's kind of corny, but I would just say that we have been working with the Housing Finance Agency. What you said, we think that we're going to be able to pick up a few new projects in some of the disaster-hit counties using CDBG-DR funds. I think about $15 million right now. When we get the new, as they say in Washington, tranche of funds, we anticipate using some more of those, taking advantage of those tax credits. And I would just say that when we get down off the stage here, if you'll give me your contact information, we'll see what we can do. Is that good?
To go back to Chairman Barfield shared with you the ideas around the property over Wrightsboro, they are talking about how creatively to put to use the funds so that we can continue to address all of the issues. One of the things that I've heard time and again from the folks in Washington is after every storm, we learn new ways of doing things. And so they're not yet, you look at a Federal Register and you read a rule and you feel like it's set in stone, and technically it is, but they're open to us helping them interpret things differently, and it's our responsibility to help them think differently as they try to apply funds in the future.
Next question's Tom, table 29.
So one of the things that I've heard about was that the landfill capacity, the lifespan was shortened. So I was just curious if you guys had any insights on things that you would do for next time regarding the yard debris pickup and the home debris pickup and disposal.
So fortunately, no yard debris pickup went to the landfill. FEMA contracted with several companies to store that material off-site. The county, we enlisted the services of several different companies to indeed pick up storm debris. Our biggest thing came from construction debris. And we do have a facility at our landfill that actually helps sort that material out and keep it out of our landfill, but it's still there. It's definitely shortened the life of our landfill, and we're trying to figure out how do we extend that life even more as we've had so much debris come in. Everything from roofing materials to sheetrock to lumber that's coming in to bricks that are coming in from homes that were damaged. And that's just something that you can't avoid because your landfill is there for that particular purpose. Not much more you can say about that, you know. It's there for that purpose.
Good. We got time for one more question. Lori from table 13.
Okay. In the spirit of appreciation of looking at what went well and points of pride, what would you absolutely wanted to continue and do more of?
And since it's the last question, I'll tweak that a little bit and be a media person and say answer her question, but then also what was the one lesson learned that we could improve?
With me?
Yes, sir.
Our recovery center, it's become a model for the state. Folks are looking at us not only in our state, but around the region as well in terms of having a disaster recovery center where people can go as a one-stop shop to get the resources that they need. And I'm glad that we had the right person in place to implement that.
And what was the biggest lesson learned?
The biggest lesson learned, be prepared. And that's what it boils down to, being prepared and take care of your people.
For me, the best thing that came out of, the thing we did best was to coalesce. The United Way and all of the agencies that were in the midst of immediate response came together very quickly to start collaborating to make sure that not only were we not creating redundancies where if we weren't talking to each other, but that we were also covering everybody who needed the help. And that continues in the form of the New Hanover County Disaster Recovery Coalition. Make sure I get that name right every time. But it's a group of faith community and nonprofit community along with the city and the county and the chamber sitting around a table every month and in between each of those meetings to make sure we're staying in place. That to me was our best takeaway, to make sure we are together in our response and recovery and planning efforts. For me, the thing that I learned that I've become a broken record over that abysmal small business recovery rate following a disaster. It is critical. Those jobs are so important. We can get people back in their homes, but if we can't get them a job, then they're going to leave. And so making sure we don't become one of those statistics is really important to me.
Well, Natalie took mine. It was really powerful to see all the organizations in town that help people come together and businesses, the leadership of the faith community really pulling us all together. And I'll just follow your great synopsis of that by saying when the Houston, who obviously went through Harvey a year before Florence, they helped us a lot with our long-term recovery groups. And one of the big takeaways from them that they said is don't waste this disaster. It sounded kind of weird, like, don't waste this disaster, but it's now that everybody's together, don't waste the opportunity you have to not just get back to where you were or kind of recover and find that old normal, but create a new normal. So these recovery groups, they're not just for long-term disaster recovery from Florence. They're for us to work together to become a more resilient community overall. and make sure that we're not duplicating services, make sure that we know where, everybody knows where the outposts are to deliver supplies, so we can all use those and get supplies into the community, so we can all maximize the resources that are coming into our community. So that's probably our biggest one, because we've always operated in such silos. There's a housing people, there's the education people, there's the business community, and knowing how intertwined we all are really, and how our issues impact each other, that's just something we can grow on and move forward in the future.
I want to just say thank you to our city manager, Sterling Cheatham, and to our county manager, Chris Coudray. They put an exceptional team together. The EOC with Stephen and what he was able to do there. For those of you who were not there, but for those of us that saw it, it was phenomenal. And also working with Mike and his team at the state, just tremendous coordination, teamwork personified. I mean, you have to be there to see it. And just seeing all these folks working together and taking on issues one right after the other from calls coming in. I don't know if a lot of people understand what happened, but at the EOC, our 911 center went down. And can you imagine the calls that were coming in for rescue, for help? That had to be transferred over to Raleigh. You guys picked it up, got it back to us. We had to move an entire EOC out of the EOC into another area. These folks did it within minutes. Phenomenal teamwork and how people came together. I mean, that is something I was so proud to see. I mean, it gives me just chill bumps just to think about it. And just these people working there, 12 straight days, 24 hours a day, just to ensure that we've got all the things that we needed into the community, and it's just a great coordinated effort. And then I have to also say, the community, the citizens coming together that were here, that were embedded, that were in the aftermath of this thing, working together, neighbor helping neighbor. I mean, that was just heartwarming to see. In these times of stress and people fighting with one another, just to see people coming together to help one another was just phenomenal. I just can't thank him enough. And even, I know Tony McEwen's out there, the city and put on a benefit concert. I think we raised over $1 million some for this thing, statewide. But that was a great thing for this community. I mean, we even had a national act. Willie Nelson's son, Lucas Nelson, came in here and gave a free concert, raised $66,000 at the Greenfield Lake Amphitheater for this thing. Just called up and said, what can I do to help this community that's been so great to me? So, that's just something grand to see. And we got a great state here, great agencies that are helping us, great leaders here in the community that are really doing everything in our powers to make this a better place and to prepare for these hurricanes, because we do love the coast. That's why we're here. And we're going to experience other hurricanes. God forbid we don't have one this year. But, we're prepared and we're going to get better, and we've identified things that we need to work on for the next hurricane. And these folks are working their butts off to make sure that we address each and every one of those things, and something will come back, then we'll get it fixed.
As we say at the state EOC, hooah. Hooah. That's good. So what my takeaways of what happened good for us was we have something called the Business EOC in our state EOC, and it's both virtual and it's both, butts and seats. And we have over 600 partners. And you will find in our Business EOC that if we can't figure out a solution by the standard logistics, operations, emergency services kind of stuff, we can toss it over to our Business EOC. They are so solutions oriented. They can figure it out and do it for us, and they don't ask for money. It's businesses helping people. And let me tell you, nationally, we're number one in the nation and well known, and I just want to thank all the businesses that are partners with us. The other thing is that we think that we're the best prepared state because of the strength of our local partners. And you heard the mayor talking about it. Wow, all you have to do is just look around you right here in New Hanover and Wilmington to look at your fire service, your EMS, your police force, your hospitals. These professionals, emergency managers, they all come together and they make things happen. And so we're so proud of them. And it's not just here, it's statewide. And so it's really the strength of my agency is at the local grassroots level. And we work together not just during disaster ops, but during daily ops too. So the couple of things that, that we really, really need to get better in, well, there's a lot of things, you heard the commissioner and I talking about, but for the sake of time, I'll just tell you that we really need to penetrate the flood insurance market a lot better. Because as I mentioned earlier, the more people that have flood insurance, those people are in a better place now. The problem is how do we make it affordable? They've spent millions of dollars on studies trying to figure out how to make it more affordable, and the best answer they can come up with is that it's hard. And so, I could have told them that for a lot less money. And so, but then, and then we circle back around to what we've kind of been talking about here for the whole time, and that's affordable housing. Affordable housing is really, the more affordable housing that we have is going to solve a lot of problems, a lot of issues, and it's gonna make really everywhere we live a better place and a better state. So anyway, that's kind of what we're working on, and we're trying to push it hard all the time because we think a healthy, happy family with a good job, more education, that's better for everybody. And so I know I'm corny, but I'm an old military guy. That's the way I look at stuff. But anyway, thank you, sir.
Thanks. So please have a round of applause for our panel. We always like to give our panelists a reading assignment after serving this duty, and since we were talking about a lot of leadership issues, we got them a new book called $1 Trillion Coach, which is about Bill Campbell, who mentored a lot of the leaders in Silicon Valley, including Steve Jobs. So hope you enjoy your book. Hope we don't have a storm this year, and have a good week.
Hope it's
Thank
not
you.
a course of action. Good to see you, sir.